Well, good morning, everybody. It's good to see those of you who are on here, and hopefully, we'll have a few more people join us. Um, I'm booting up my phone. I turned it off for a moment to save bandwidth, but there's some scripture on here I wanted to share as a part of this chapter. So, hopefully, I can access it. If you are on and want to say hello, that would be great. I'd appreciate that. I know that other people probably read whatever you say as well when they are exploring. Oftentimes, have a number of people who view us later. They can't view us at 9, so they view us later. As always, feel free to share with others as well. Um, uh, we'd love for you to share this with other. Maybe they can benefit from it as well. I think we all agree that Lewis has so much to say that's so important for us to hear. And so I'll go ahead and begin. This is from Galatians 6. This is an interesting chapter. It's a chapter that addresses a number of themes, but the most dominant theme, I think, has to do with time and how we spend our time and the way in which we spend our time. And so I think that if you're younger and you're listening to this chapter, then it would be very wise to pay attention to how you're going to live the balance of your life. And if you're middle aged or older, Lewis has some interesting things to say about that, about this stage of life for us. And so I think that you'll find it to be insightful and helpful. This is from Galatians chapter 6. So if you have your Bibles and you want to turn to it, you can. Uh, the Apostle Paul says to the Christians in Galatia, brothers, if anyone is caught in any transgression, you who are spiritual should restore him in a spirit of gentleness. Keep watch on yourself, lest you too be tempted. So, lest you be arrogant by observing this in another person, and then you become prideful. Bear one another's burdens, and so fulfill the law of Christ. For if anyone thinks he is something when he is nothing, he deceives himself. But let each one test his own work, and then his reason to boast will be in himself alone and not in his neighbor, for each will have to bear his own load. Let the one who taught the word share all good things with the one who teaches. Do not be deceived. God is not mocked, for whatever one sows, that he will also reap. So Paul is basically giving some wisdom here, and this would fall under a kind of wisdom tradition. And so that's what you're getting. You're getting these snippets. They aren't always necessarily connected, but they are pastoral tidbits of wisdom. And so he says, do not be deceived. God is not mocked, for whatever one sows, that he will also reap. For the one who sows according to his own flesh will from the flesh reap corruption, but the one who sows to the Spirit will from the Spirit reap eternal life. And let us not grow weary in doing good, for in due season we will reap if we do not give up. So then, as we have opportunity, let us do good to everyone, especially to those who are of the household of faith. And so I think, verses 9 and 10 are the primary verses that we want to focus on here as we read this chapter, because I think that in a very overarching general way is what gets at it. And let us not grow weary of doing good. So regardless of what age, what stage you are in life, whether you are younger and getting older and wondering if you can, run the race, or those of us who are older and have run a goodly portion of the race, we cannot grow weary. And let us not grow weary of doing good, for in due season we will reap if we do not give up. So then, as we have opportunity, let us do good to everyone, especially to those who are of the household of faith. And so, um, the Apostle Paul is encouraging people to continue to hang in there and work hard. God has called them to do, be what God has called them to be. So let us get to the chapter. Then this is chapter 28, and I think that the core of what I really want to get to is in the middle of the chapter, but it's important to read the beginning part. My dear Wormwood, told you not to fill your letters with rubbish about the war. I meant, of course, that I did not want to have your rather infinite rhapsodies about the death of men and destruction of cities, insofar as the war really concerns the spiritual state of the patient. I naturally want full reports, and on this aspect you seem singularly obtuse. Obtuse is when it's blurry, not well defined. Thus, you tell me with glee that there is a reason to expect heavy air raids on the town where the creature, that is, the patient, lives. This is a crying example of something I have complained about already: your readiness to forget the main point in your immediate enjoyment of human suffering. Do you not know that bombs kill men? Or do you not realize that the patient's death at this moment is precisely what we want to avoid? He has escaped the worldly friends with whom you try to entangle him. So you remember all those worldly friends that he had that were well educated and laughed a lot and were very sophisticated and influential and things like that. That's what he's talking about. He has escaped the worldly friends with whom you try to entangle him. He has fallen in love with a very Christian woman and is temporarily immune from your attacks on his chastity and the various methods of corrupting his spiritual life, which we have been trying are so far unsuccessful. At the present moment, as the full impact of the war draws nearer, and his worldly hopes take a proportionately lower place in his mind. So, because the war is becoming more pronounced in their lives, in the patient's life, he's thinking more and more about what really you ought to be thinking about, eternal things, and less about worldly things, is what Screwtape is saying here. At the present moment, as the full impact of the war draws nearer, and his worldly hopes take a proportionately lower place in his mind, full of his defense work, so he's working for the Department of Defense, full of the girl, so his life is full of this wonderful Christian girl, forced to attend to his neighbors more than he has ever done before, because they're being impacted by the war and the hardships of the war, so he's helping them. Just as we were reading here in Galatians chapter 6, more than he has ever done before, and liking it more than he expected, taken out of himself, as the humans say, and daily increasing in his conscious dependence on the enemy that is God, he will almost certainly be lost to us if he is killed tonight. So, so obvious that I am ashamed to write it. I sometimes wonder if you young fiends are not kept out of temptation due to time, if you are not in some danger of becoming infected by the sentiments and the values of the humans among whom you work. Of course, do not tend to regard death as the prime evil and survival as the greatest good. I think that's not true, but that can be largely true for Christians who are not afraid to die. You know, they are so connected to Christ, so convinced of their faith, and their experiences have been so profound that they have a great taste, a foretaste of what life might be like for them on the other side. And so they look forward to that. And so it's sort of like what the Apostle Paul says, that he doesn't know whether he should live or whether he should die. And that if he dies, this is in Philippians, and that if he dies, it would be much better for him. But if he stays, it's much better for the believers so that he can continue to minister to people. And so he produces that iconic phrase in Philippians, "For me to live is Christ, and to die is gain." For me to live is Christ, and to die is gain. So Screwtape is talking about, in particular, those kinds of Christians. So when he says they, of course, do not tend to regard death as a prime evil and survival as the greatest good, then he's really talking about the Apostle Paul there. And I'm just going to write this down because I'm going to use this in my book that I want to write on this. So in any case, but that is because we have taught them to do so. Do not let us be infected by our own propaganda. I know it seems strange that your chief aim at the moment should be the very same thing for which the patient's lover and his mothers are praying, namely his bodily safety. So Screwtape is saying, look, if he dies now, he's a strong believer, and he enters into eternity. And so Screwtape is saying to Wormwood, him to die now. I mean, even though he might suffer and you might get some glee from that, at the end, you will have lost your patient, will have been in eternity. And so there's this strange confluence where we have the patient's girlfriend's mother praying for his safety as he works in the Defense Department for Great Britain. And Screwtape is saying there's this confluence of sorts where, they are praying that he does not die. And you better hope that he doesn't die, because if he dies, he's going to heaven. And that's not what we want. We need more time to derail him in terms of his faith. But so it is. You should be guarding him like the apple of your eye. If he dies now, you lose him. If he survives the war, there is always hope. The enemy has guarded him from you through the first great wave of temptation. So God has guarded this patient through the first great wave of temptations, God will not allow us to be tempted beyond what we are able to endure, and that's really what he's writing in here. The enemy has guarded him from you through the first great wave of temptations, but if only he can be kept alive, you have time itself as your ally. So think about that. Those of us, who are believers, that the time that we have remaining here on earth is a time that God wants us to use to grow and to mature and to become more Christ-like. But that same time, Satan sees as an opportunity to derail us in our faith, and hopefully to send us to a different destination eternally. The enemy has guarded him from you through the first great wave of temptations, but if only he can be kept alive, you have time itself as your ally. The long, dull, and this is the important part where he's getting here that really speaks to many of us. because he's saying he's a young man and time is our ally. Let's see what happens when he enters into the long, dull, monotonous years of middle-aged prosperity or middle-aged adversity or excellent campaigning weather. So Lewis is, I mean, he's pointing something out that's pretty typical in the life of humans. That once you get past those earlier years where you're trying to make your mark and you get yourself established and things like that, he classifies it as the dull, monotonous years of middle-aged prosperity. Now, how many people have we seen like that? And how many men and women have we known where those same years launched them into, for men it's male menopause, right? Where they divorce their wives, and or they find they have an affair with some younger woman or whatever. I mean, the long monotonous years of prosperity. It's those kinds of things where we pursue. Life is unfulfilling, and so we pursue these other avocations or interests or sins that in the end can derail us. So that's what he's alluding to here, or middle-aged adversity, health issues, loss of job, an untimely death in the family, all of those kinds of things. He said these are excellent opportunities for us to derail this person in terms of their faith. You see, it's so hard for these creatures to persevere. The routine of adversity, the gradual decay of youthful lives and youthful hopes, the quiet despair, hardly felt as pain, of ever overcoming the chronic temptations with which we have again and again defeated them, the drabness with which we create in their lives, and the inarticulate resentment with which we teach them to respond to it. All this provides admirable opportunities of wearing out a soul by attrition. If, on the other hand, the middle years prove prosperous, our position is even stronger. Prosperity knits a man to the world. He feels that he is finding his place in it, while really it is finding its place in him. I mean, this last line, prosperity knits a man to the world, he feels he's finding his place in it, while really it's finding his place in him, is one of the more well-known. It's not at the top, but it's one of the more well-known quotes by C.S. Lewis. Very articulate, very perceptive. But I'm tempted to, take this whole section and to put it on my Facebook feed because I think, so many of my friends, myself, were at this stage, and I'm sure some of them could really relate to it. So he goes on to say, his increasing reputation, his widening circle of acquaintances, his sense of importance, the growing pressure of absorbing and agreeable work build up in him a sense of being really at home on earth, which is just what we want. You will notice that the young are generally less unwilling to die than the middle-aged and the old. So I feel like I should just read that through again. And I feel like it would, for those of us who are listening, that you should pay very close attention to what Lewis is saying here. And again, this is probably in part an autobiography. This is, I'm sure, some of the things that Lewis experienced, a person even of his esteemed status and ability. He's writing about his life here because this is so true of many of us in life altogether. So I'm going to read it again. Just pay close attention to it. The enemy has guarded him from you through the first great wave of temptations. But if only he can be kept alive, you have time itself as your ally. So, for example, the long, dull, monotonous years of middle aged prosperity or middle aged adversity are excellent campaigning weather for those kinds of temptations. You see, it's so hard for these creatures to persevere. The routine of adversity, the gradual decay of youthful loves and youthful hopes, the quiet despair, hardly felt as pain, of ever overcoming the chronic temptations with which we have again and again defeated them. In the drabness with which we create in their lives, in the inarticulate resentment with which we teach them to respond to it. All this provides admirable opportunities of wearing out a soul by attrition. If, on the other hand, the middle years prove prosperous, our position is even stronger. Prosperity knits a man to the world. He feels that he is finding his place in it, while really it's finding its place in him. His increasing reputation, his widening circle of acquaintances, his sense of importance, the growing pressure of absorbing and agreeable work build up in him a sense of being really at home on earth, which is just what we want. You will notice that the young are generally less unwilling to die than the middle-aged and the old. So, in your live chat there, I would be interested in your thoughts, just a sentence or two about how that assessment by Lewis impacts you and what it makes you think like, how it makes you think, and maybe even some examples that you've seen in your life where he describes this very thing, and you're how perceptive of him to capture that. The truth is that the enemy, having oddly destined these mere animals to life in his own eternal world, has guarded them pretty effectively from the danger of feeling at home anywhere else. That is why we must often wish long life to our patients. 70 years is not a day too much for the difficult task of unraveling their souls from heaven and building up a firm attachment to the earth. While they are young, we find them always shooting off at a tangent. Even if we contrive to keep them ignorant of explicit religion, the incalculable winds of fantasy and music and poetry, the mere face of a girl, the song of a bird, or the sight of a horizon are always blowing our whole structure away. So he's saying, that the essence of the created order is always at work against the deeds, the activity, the schemes of the enemy. They will not apply themselves steadily to worldly advancement, prudent connections, and the policy of safety first. So inveterate, the word inveterate means a long-lasting habit not likely to change. So inveterate is their appetite for heaven that our best method at this stage of attaching them to earth is to make them believe that the earth can be turned into heaven at some future date by politics or eugenics or science or psychology or whatnot. This is exactly how progressives think. This is exactly how social justice Christians think. It's exactly it. This was 70 years ago. He was talking about this. Stunning. Real worldliness is a work of time, assisted, of course, by pride, for which we teach them to describe the creeping death as good sense or maturity or experience. Experience is the particular sense we teach them to give it. It is by, I'm sorry, experience in the particular sense we teach them to give it is, by the by, a most useful word. A great human philosopher nearly let our secret out when he said that where virtue is concerned, experience is the mother of illusion. Experience is the mother of illusion. And I don't have time to go into all of that today, but that is something that is really worth exploring. But thanks to a change in fashion and also of course to the historical point of view, we have largely rendered this philosopher's book innocuous, that is harmless. How valuable time is to us may be gauged by the fact that the enemy allows us so little of it. The majority of the human race dies in infancy. Of the survivors, a good many die in youth. It is obvious that to him, human birth is important chiefly as the qualification for human death, and death solely as the gate to that of another kind of life. We are allowed to work only on a selected minority of the race, for what the humans call a, quote, normal life, end quote, is the exception. Apparently, he wants some, but only a very few, of the human animals with which he is peopling heaven to have had the experience of resisting us through an earthly life of 60 or 70 years. Well, there is our opportunity. The smaller it is, the better we must use it. Whatever you do, keep your patient as safe as you possibly can. So, again, there's in this latter portion, there's so much going on here. And there are some theological issues that, or, principles that he's alluding to that are, um, you know, I think important. One of the other, biblical texts I think would be important here, where he says, "Do not love the world or anything in the world." Right? Do not love the world or or any uh, or, or anything in the world. And I think that that is, one of the ways in which, obviously, we believers who are older, we spend so much time establishing ourselves, becoming financially secure, working hard to make our house a home, um, not only getting things of comfort, but buying things for pleasure. That we have to be very careful that in all of that we are the possessors of those things. Those things are not the possessors of us, and that those things cannot interfere. They can't interfere with um, our calling and work for Christ. So, there may be a time when you are called to use what you have on behalf of Christ. So, 2.5 years ago when we bought the house that we have, I mean, we spent 2 years looking for a house, and we really wanted a house that could be used, for family, and a house that could be used for ministry. And this is the first house that we've had that where that has been true. I mean, possible because of the size of the home that we have and its location and the things that we were able to do with it. And we genuinely enjoy entertaining people and having people here. And we've talked about, we have Bible studies here and book studies here, and We want to have a neighborhood Bible study, and we're getting to know our neighbors better, and we're trying to do more in terms of outreaching to them and having a place that's safe and enjoyable and pleasurable, that's peaceful. We think our home is very peaceful. All of those kinds of things. We want a home where our grandchildren can come, and that it's like an event. It's like an adventure, and they can, we can convey the means of grace to them in that regard as well. And so, so we want to have this house, but we don't want this house to have us. And we have other things as well, things that are not necessary and that things that aren't really fun. But we want those fun things to be used, not only for, to enjoy the gifts of God, but also and the blessings of God, but also to use them as a means to have access to other people and to have influence in their lives. But it's so hard, when you get to be our age, where you finally reach some sense of financial security, not to keep things in balance, and not, not to. We have to be really careful that those things always serve us. We do not live to serve those things. And so that's in part what Screwtape is talking about here for those people who are like us, um, how we have to keep all of that in balance and in perspective and relegated to its proper place. Otherwise, they become idols, and they become ways in which we can be derailed in our faith, and the ways in which our the vitalness of our faith can be muted and blunted, and so we can't let that happen. I remember when I bought my first truck, it seemed like it was unnecessary. I did a lot of work around the house in Ambridge, was always, bringing home plants and flowers and uh, mulch and dirt, and so it was very helpful for that kind of a thing. But I made a choice that if we were going to have something that a vehicle of that nature, then it had to be one that we could justify for other things too. And so, and so if people needed help moving stuff, I wanted to be that person. If we had a food bank at the church at the time, I wanted to be that person to pick it up, and I would fill that truck up. So, I mean, those are just some examples for me. There are plenty of times when I didn't use the things God gave me as I should have used them. But I'm just giving you examples of when I did. So I think this is a sobering chapter in some respects, deeply insightful, but sobering as well. And I hope that it was helpful for you. So there are two, maybe three texts I would add to this. So Galatians 6, do not grow weary in doing good. The Apostle Paul's passage in Philippians, the precise reference escapes me, but it's for me to live as Christ, to die is gain. And then and maybe this is the more dominant passage. Do not love the world or anything in the world that John talks about. I believe that's in First John. Might be in the Gospel of John, but I think that's in First John. So I didn't get a chance. These came to mind as I was talking, so they're easy enough to find, even on your own phone on a search engine, DuckDuckGo or whatever. So, thank you very much for joining me this morning. I hope this was helpful, and feel free to share some comments, and feel free to share this with others. I think it's a great chapter. Take care and have a great day. Thanks. Bye bye.